The moment that set everything in motion did not arrive with a crash or a shout. It arrived in a whisper, one of those casual little comments that slides under the skin and changes everything without anyone noticing. It happened at the end of a long shift, the kind where the hall lights feel dimmer and the air starts to smell like worry. I was standing outside the medication room, rubbing a knot out of my shoulder, when I heard the new admin laugh. Then I heard the words that would follow me home, coil in my mind, and refuse to let go. She is just a beeper in a hospital app. A beeper. Not a nurse, not a person, not someone who had spent more nights than I could count keeping vigil beside beds where families slept in chairs and patients clung to life with trembling hands. Just a noise, a function. Something that could be replaced with a tap on a screen. My name is Leora. 14 years on the same ward, and I had never heard anything like it aimed in my direction. I had been called many things over the years: lifesaver, angel, bulldog, witch in scrubs, perfectionist, machine, but never a beeper, never something so faceless, so dismissible. I stood there for a moment with my fingers on the cool metal handle of the medication room and let the words settle. The admin was new, barely 3 weeks in, still speaking like he was auditioning for a part instead of running a hospital unit. He had one of those polished smiles people wear when they mistake confidence for competence. I had wanted to give him a chance. I had wanted to believe he cared about the ward, the way the rest of us did. But that afternoon ruined it. He was reviewing schedule changes with a cluster of supervisors when he said it, and they all laughed along with him, like reducing a human being to an alert tone was clever. His niece stood beside him, her fresh badge tilted, her scrubs crisp, her expression bored, in the way only someone who has never been held accountable can look. She flipped through a stack of charts with casual disinterest, tapping her pen against the wrong names and skipping entire sections as though documentation were an optional hobby. I had trained dozens of nurses, watched them find their footing, encouraged them through fear and fatigue. But his niece had shown up with a kind of breezy entitlement that set my teeth on edge from the first hour. I had planned to speak up. I had planned to insist on proper training, to protect the patients the way I always had. 14 years teaches you when to intervene. 14 years teaches you when silence is dangerous. But instead, that day, I said nothing. Because after calling me a beeper, the admin announced he was giving my shift to his niece. He said it like he was offering her a prize. He said it like my years of experience were a relic of an outdated system he had come here to fix. He told me I could take a breather, maybe catch up on some continuing education, as if my entire career could be paused to make room for his family. I felt something inside me shift at that moment. Not break, not shatter, just shift, like a door clicking open in a dark hallway. I finished my tasks. I handed off my patients. I updated charts with the same precision I always used. And then, for the first time in 14 years, I walked out exactly on time. No overtime, no last-minute crisis management, no staying late to cover for someone else. My badge was still warm against my chest as I stepped into the parking lot. The evening air tasted different, cooler, sharper, as though the world had tilted by a fraction without anyone noticing. I sat in my car and stared at the hospital windows, glowing behind me. I thought about the admin's laugh. I thought about the niece flipping charts like they were flyers. I thought about the patients who trusted us with the most fragile parts of their lives. And for the first time, anger did not surge. It cooled. It steadied. It became purpose. The cracks began almost immediately. Thin hairline fractures that only someone like me would notice at first. His niece walked into the ward with her glossy badge and her bright smile, acting as if the place belonged to her. I watched her introduce herself to patients with a chirpy tone that felt rehearsed, like she was playing nurse rather than being one. She carried herself with that breezy confidence people have when they have never been the one held responsible at 3 a.m, with alarms ringing and a patient slipping. She had no idea how unforgiving real responsibility could be. On her very first shift, she copied medication dosages straight from an old template, not bothering to cross-check the new orders. I saw her paste the wrong dosage into a chart, watched her skip the red warning icon that any experienced nurse would have opened, double-checked, and confirmed with pharmacy. She clicked past it like it was an annoying pop-up. When I reminded her to verify the updated orders, she flashed me a smile that had no warmth. Her uncle trusts me, she said, as if that somehow rewrote the laws of pharmacology. She changed nothing. By the third day, she was mixing up vital signs, filing them under the wrong patient panels with the kind of careless rhythm that made my stomach tighten. I caught her entering a fever spike under a patient who had been stable all morning, while the patient who actually had the fever was waiting for a doctor who believed the chart was accurate. I corrected it quietly, logging the error in my notes. She watched me with mild annoyance, like I was interrupting her flow. She told me I was old school. I told her accuracy was not a trend. Her smirk said she did not care. Each shift with her felt like walking beside a ticking clock. She skipped double checks and baseline assessments, acted like time was something she could bend to her preference. She breezed into the medication room humming softly, grabbing vials without confirming patient allergies. Once, I watched her pull antibiotics for someone whose chart clearly showed a severe reaction history. When I pointed it out, she rolled her eyes. The system should catch that. I told her she was the system. She laughed. I stayed silent after that, not because I agreed, but because silence served a purpose. I documented every error, every skipped step, every misplaced note. I wrote down the time, the patient, the correction I made. I created a private file that grew heavier by the day. It was not something I enjoyed, but it was something I needed. I told myself I would not intervene unless life hung in the balance. I had trained myself to know the difference between irritation and danger. I told myself to step back and let the cracks widen on their own. People like her always revealed themselves. Still, each shift tightened around me like a band. The ward I had known for 14 years began to feel strange, as if the walls themselves sensed the imbalance. Nurses whispered in break rooms about near misses and confusion. A resident asked me why documentation suddenly felt unreliable. Patients looked unsettled when she hurried through assessments without making eye contact. I saw fear forming in small details. A patient clutching their call button, a family member frowning at inconsistencies, a doctor double-checking charts they had trusted for years. And through it all, the admin floated around with his polished smile, praising his niece for improving efficiency. He told her she was streamlining the unit. He told me to give her space to innovate. He told the team that healthcare needed fresh eyes. He did not notice the trail of corrections behind her. He did not see the hesitation in the other nurses when she approached the desk. He did not hear the quiet shift in tone when her name came up in morning huddle, but I did. Every misstep, every careless move, every dismissive smirk reminded me that I had been pushed aside for someone who treated competence like clutter. The pressure built with each passing day, slow and steady, like a pot left on simmer. I felt it in my chest, in my hands, in the way I paused before each shift, gathering myself for whatever new crack appeared next. And I kept documenting, because cracks never stay small. They widen, they deepen. Eventually, they give way. I was halfway through folding laundry when my phone buzzed with the kind of message that stops the air in a room. I had tossed my scrubs on top of the basket earlier that morning, planning to wash them later, but suddenly the fabric felt heavier, as if it remembered what I had left behind. The text came from one of the senior nurses, a woman who never exaggerated and never panicked. Her words were clipped, strained, and unmistakably urgent. A patient had coded during my niece's shift, an avoidable error, a charting mistake, a medication mix-up. My chest tightened before I even finished reading. I sat down on the edge of my bed, holding my phone like it might reveal something different if I stared long enough. The patient had survived, she said, but barely. The niece had documented the wrong dosage earlier in the day, skipped the required confirmation steps, and moved on as if the chart were a suggestion rather than a record of someone's fragile safety. The oncoming staff had trusted the chart, as we all had for years, because trust in documentation is the backbone of patient care. That trust had nearly killed someone. I closed my eyes, breathing slowly. I felt a cold, steady clarity settle into place, the same feeling I used to get during night shifts when alarms pierced the quiet, and I had to react without hesitation. But this time, I was not there. I was sitting in my small apartment with sunlight filtering across the carpet. while chaos erupted in a place I had given 14 years of my life. Another message followed from the same nurse. The admin was blaming the situation on a software glitch. He was calling the error a technical hiccup and assuring the family that the system had failed, not his niece. He had already started the paperwork to label it an IT issue. My jaw clenched. A system glitch. Not a human mistake. Not criminal negligence. Not the result of skipping every safeguard designed to prevent exactly this kind of disaster. He was burying it. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, not because I needed water, but because I needed movement to keep from shaking. I leaned against the counter, feeling the cool surface under my palms, and thought about the file sitting on my laptop. Weeks of documentation, dates, times, screenshots, corrections. Every error I had quietly repaired. Every discrepancy I had recorded. Every moment she had smirked her way past protocol while her uncle applauded her for efficiency. He had no idea I had it. I opened my laptop and pulled up the folder. The list stretched down the screen in an orderly line of evidence. I scrolled through the entries, each one a small crack that I had watched widen. I had not known when the turning point would come, but now that it had arrived, it felt inevitable. Nepotism could hide incompetence for a while, but negligence does not stay quiet. It collects interest, it compounds, and eventually it demands payment. I read the official message the admin sent out to the unit. Polished words, calm reassurance, a gentle reminder that technology is imperfect, and we must remain vigilant. Not one mention of human error. Not one indication of responsibility. Certainly not a hint that his niece had nearly ended a life. The entire thing felt like a slap across the face to everyone who had ever stayed past the end of a shift to triple-check orders out of pure devotion. My phone buzzed again. Another nurse, another message, more details. I absorbed each one like a puzzle piece locking into place. The niece had frozen during the code, unable to respond, unable to think past the mistake she had made. The team had to pull her out of the room. The admin had barred anyone from adding comments to the incident report. He wanted the glitch narrative, and he wanted it fast. I closed the messages and stared at the documentation I had collected. I had always believed in fixing problems quietly, in protecting the ward by absorbing stress rather than adding to it. But this was no longer a crack. It was a fault line, and it had just shifted beneath his feet. The staff meeting was called for the early hours of the morning, the kind where half the unit was still waking up and the other half had not yet shaken off the night shift haze. I knew before I walked in that something was off. The room had that tense stillness, the kind that sits heavy on people's shoulders and makes every whisper sharper. The admin stood at the front like a man convinced he still held control. His hands clasped, his smile polished to the point of absurdity. He opened the meeting by thanking everyone for their hard work, as if gratitude could patch over the terror that had rippled through the ward 2 days earlier. Then he mentioned a system error, a minor hiccup in charting, nothing to worry about, nothing unusual, nothing that required further discussion. No one spoke. But the silence was not agreement. It was disbelief. I watched the room as he talked, saw the subtle shifts in posture, the raised brows, the tight jaws, the sideways glances. Nurses who had worked trauma shifts without flinching looked like they were barely containing themselves. A few muttered phrases floated between staff near the back, low enough to go unnoticed by him but loud enough to fuel the growing fire. Families had begun asking questions, wanting explanations for delays in rounds or odd discrepancies between updates. Someone had overheard a doctor snap at a resident that he did not trust the charting anymore. The tension was spreading through the building like static. Still, he spoke as though absolutely nothing had happened. He wrapped up the meeting with a reminder to stay focused and trust the process, and then he dismissed us with a confident nod. It would have been almost funny if it were not so reckless. The group dispersed slowly, not because anyone needed more time in the room, but because no one wanted to be the first to break the collective restraint. As I stepped into the hallway, a senior doctor approached me. He was not the kind to mince words, and his expression told me he was far past politeness. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Not here." He led me into a small consultation room and closed the door behind us. He asked what I knew, his voice controlled but edged with frustration. I did not answer with speculation or emotion. I handed him the folder of documentation, the file I had kept growing as the admin praised his niece for efficiency. The doctor read the first few pages with increasing intensity, flipping through the entries, the timestamps, the corrections. He asked whether anyone else had seen it. I told him no. He asked whether I had more. I nodded. He took a deep breath and told me to give him everything. When he left the room, folder in hand, I knew something irreversible had just begun. By the next morning, the medical director requested a meeting. He was not smiling. He was not calm. He asked me to walk him through the documentation point by point. I did. He took notes as I talked, stopping only to confirm a detail or ask for clarification. The weight of his silence afterward told me the file had landed exactly where it needed to. Before lunch, word spread that the niece had been summoned to an emergency review. She walked toward the conference room with none of her usual confidence, her badge suddenly looking too big for her uniform. She could not charm her way out of sworn statements and documented evidence. She could not smirk her way past a near-fatal mistake. The admin hovered outside the room, pacing with tight steps, his jaw clenched, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked like a man trying to stop an avalanche with his hands. A few staff members watched him from the nurse's station, not out of sympathy, but curiosity. It was the first time he had shown even a flicker of pressure. His eyes darted toward every closed door as if waiting for someone to step out and deliver the verdict he feared. I stood at the far end of the hall, leaning against the counter, observing the unraveling with a steady calm I had not expected to feel. I was not triumphant. I was not vengeful. I was simply done holding the line alone. The truth had been placed in the right hands, and now it was moving through the system with its own momentum. He felt it. Everyone did. The floor had begun to shift beneath him. The investigation stretched across one long week, though it felt like time moved differently inside those walls. Each day carried a hush that did not belong in a hospital, a waiting kind of silence that settled into corners and lingered outside doorways. Staff spoke quietly, more aware than ever of who might be listening. Families sensed the shift without knowing why, asking gentle questions about delays or about why certain faces were no longer familiar. I moved through my shifts with careful intention, giving no sign that anything was happening behind the scenes. Even as the ground beneath us changed inch by inch, the niece was called into interviews over and over, emerging each time with a paler face and shakier hands. Gone was the careless confidence, replaced by a brittle defensiveness that cracked at the edges. She avoided eye contact with everyone, slipping through hallways like a shadow of herself. She tried, once, to corner me near the break room, demanding to know what I had said, what I had shown them, what I thought gave me the right. I told her quietly that truth does not require permission. She stared at me with a mixture of disbelief and fear, as if the world had betrayed her by expecting competence. The admin fought harder. He held impromptu huddles, trying to rally support, insisting that the unit was under attack by people who did not understand modern workflow. He spoke with forced calmness, but his voice trembled whenever he mentioned the review board. Some staff humored him with polite nods, but no one truly joined him. The code incident had shaken them too deeply. Trust in leadership does not survive that kind of fracture. By midweek, I saw him pacing near the administrative offices, clutching his phone like a lifeline. He had stopped making eye contact with staff, stopped smiling, stopped carrying himself like a man certain the world would bend for him. The weight of accountability pressed down on him in ways he clearly had not anticipated. Nepotism had offered him comfort. Consequences did not. On the final morning, the board delivered its decision. I was stocking supplies when word reached the ward that the admin had been escorted out by security. His badge deactivated, his access revoked. The thin thread of denial snapped completely, leaving him sputtering protests that grew weaker with each step toward the exit. A few staff members watched from a distance, not out of cruelty, but out of disbelief that someone who had strutted through the hallways with so much unearned authority could look so small. His niece's hearing lasted through the afternoon. She sat before the licensing board while they read the details of her documentation errors, the near-fatal incident. the pattern of negligence. She cried. She insisted she had not been trained correctly. She claimed the system had misled her, but evidence is patient. Evidence does not waver. By the time they finished, her license was gone. She walked out of the building without meeting anyone's eyes, her badge clipped awkwardly to her collar as if she were not yet ready to accept that she would never wear it again. I returned to work the next day, not triumphant, but steady. The ward felt different in a way I could not fully articulate. Staff greeted me with a softness that had not been there before, a recognition that carried both gratitude and quiet apology. No one said the words aloud, but they hung in the air. "We should have trusted you." I did not need to hear them. I felt them. When I passed the empty office where the admin once sat, a faint echo of his polished confidence seemed to linger, like the ghost of a mistake waiting to be taught. The desk was cleared. The chair was pushed back. The room felt hollow, as if authority without integrity had finally been given its true shape. I paused in the doorway and understood something simple. Betrayal is common. It threads through families and workplaces, slipping easily between the cracks left by complacency or favoritism. But reckoning is just as inevitable. It arrives without haste, gathering weight from every ignored warning and every silenced voice. And when it comes, it does not whisper. It lands.